Alright guys, in this video we're going to look at inline level elements and block level elements. Now certain tags or HTML elements are block, some are inline. Now this is a page from W3 Schools, which is a great reference site, and it shows us which elements are block and which are inline. So all of these tags right here are block level. So we have paragraph, form, all the H tags, the heading tags, these header section, all this stuff. These are our HTML5 semantic tags, nav, main. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. Those are very important. But for now, let's look at the ones that we know, like paragraph, ordered list, unordered list, list item. All of these are block level. And then for inline, we have A tags, which are links. We have, let's see, button. We have span. Oh, we didn't talk about spans yet. Select. What else here have we looked at? And these bold and italics, we're not going to be using those anymore. Emphasis, strong, text area. These are inline. Now the difference here is that a block level element will span 100% width of the page. Okay, so it basically goes across the whole page, and then the next thing that you put on the page is going to be on the next line because it knocks it down to the next line. An inline element does not span across the page. It only takes up that space. Therefore, the next thing you put is going to go to the right of it. It's just going to go right after it. So let me give you some examples. Okay, so let's create a file here. I'll call it 08 underscore block underscore inline.html, and we'll go ahead and put our structure in here. Let's say inline verse block, and inside the body here, let's go ahead and put a paragraph, which is a block level element, and I'll say lorem. Let's do lorem 30 tab or enter. And we'll save that. Let's go ahead and open this with live server. Okay, so this is a block level element. If I put another paragraph underneath it, right? Let's say lorem 20 tab. Notice how it gets pushed on to the next line. Paragraphs actually have styling by default. See the space here? They actually have default margin, which we'll talk about when we get to the CSS. But since it's block level, it goes across the whole page and pushes the next one onto the next line. Now, a link, an A tag, is an inline element. So let's go ahead and let's put a link, not within a paragraph, but just a link itself. And if we put a number sign, that just means it goes to the current page you're on. It doesn't go anywhere. And in here, let's just say a link. And if I save it, this is an inline element, which means if we add another link, let's copy this down, and I save, notice that it goes next to it. It doesn't get pushed on to the next line because it doesn't span all the way across. Okay, so that's the difference here. Now I'm going to add a style attribute because I want to put a border around all of these just so you can see kind of the outline of them. And again, I don't suggest using style tags. You want to use CSS, but we haven't gotten to that yet. I'm just showing you this for an example, and you'll learn all about borders and stuff later on. But I'm just going to say border green solid, and we'll do the same with the next one. So I'll just copy this, and let's save that, and you can see that it goes all the way across. Now let's add a red border to the link. So I'm just going to change this to red and save, and you can see that it doesn't go all the way across. Now you might be saying, well, these paragraphs are, they're long, they reach all the way across the page, but this doesn't, the end doesn't. If it were inline, the next one would start right here. So even if I just had a one-word paragraph and I save, it goes all the way across. Okay, so that's the difference, and it's very important to understand that. So another block level element is an unordered list as well as list items. So when I put a list item in here and another one, it knocks it down to the next line because it's a block level element. And you can change you can change it from inline to block or vice versa using CSS, and we're going to get into that later. But I just want you to understand the difference between inline and block. And then those, not span, I want to do a strong. The typography semantic tags like strong and strong and emphasis, those are also obviously inline, because you can see we can make this strong, but it doesn't knock it down to the next line. So these are inline. And you also have something called inline block, which I'll talk about when we get to CSS, because it doesn't really pertain to just HTML. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, guys. I just wanted to clear that up before we move on. In the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about divs with IDs and classes. Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about divs and spans, which are both HTML elements or tags, as well as ID and class attributes, which are used for semantics. They're used to kind of separate content. They're also used for CSS styling, which we're going to talk about in the next section. So let's create a new file called 09 underscore, and we'll just call it ID underscore class.html. And we're going to put our structure, our boilerplate in here. And for our title, we'll say div span ID and class. So we've used divs before. We used it to separate our our labels and inputs in the form, and where we talked about forms. So let's put a div in here, and let's say that this is going to be the header of our website. We have maybe an H1, say my website, or maybe you have an image, a logo image, and then we'll put a paragraph that says like some kind of slogan. We'll just say a site about me. Now, since everything in this div pertains to the header, I'm going to give this an ID of header, okay, or maybe even main header, because you could have multiple headers. Maybe you have you have articles on the page and you have headers for the articles. So let's call this the main header. All right, and then underneath that, let's create a UL, and let's give it some LIs, some list items, and we'll put some links inside here. And let's say this is the home page link. I'm going to copy this down twice. We'll say this is the about link. Goes to the about page. This goes to, let's say, contact. So this is a navigation menu. So let's give this UL an ID of, let's call it main nav. You can call them whatever you want. Now let's say underneath the navigation we have an area that has some information about us or about our page or whatever it may be. So we'll have a div, and let's give it an ID of about. Now here I'm going to show you a very, very helpful Emmet trick. Okay, so again, Emmet is installed with VS Code, and it allows us to do things faster. So instead of typing out ID equals, what we can do is we can say div, and we can put just a number sign which represents an ID, the word about, and then tab or enter, and it puts it in for us. And then to take it a step further, if it's a div, like we could do this with an H1, we could give it an ID of about like that. But if it's a div, we don't even have to write the word div. We can simply just put a number sign and then about, and then hit tab or enter, and it will give us a div with the ID of about. Okay, so nice little tip there. And again, you don't have to use it, but it will make you write your HTML much faster. So let's say in this about we have an H3, which is a heading. We'll say about, and then maybe a paragraph with some text. We'll just generate some dummy text here. Okay, and then maybe under that div we have, let's say, an area for contact info. Okay, and I know I haven't talked about spans or classes yet. I'll get to that in a minute. So let's create a div with the ID of contact. And in here, maybe we have another heading. Remember, it's good practice to not have more than one H1. I don't think, well, yeah, we do have an H1, which is in the header. So every div here is using an H3 as a title. You could use an H2, and again, you could use an H1. It's just good practice to just have one on the page. So let's put a UL here. We'll do some list items. We'll put like address, 50 Main Street, Boston, Mass. Let's put another list item with a phone. And let's do another list item with an email. We'll just say me at, I don't know, somethingcool.com. Okay, and then finally maybe we have a footer, so we'll have a div here with, actually we can just do ID footer. And we'll have a paragraph, and let's just say copyright 20, we'll do 2019 because it's the very end of 2018 right now. All right, so let's save this and take a look. We'll open it with Live Server. It's going to look very ugly because we have no CSS, but it's structured in a very common way. So we have a header, we have the navigation, we have some different sections about contact, and then we have a footer at the bottom. And we used IDs for all of these. Now, when it comes to CSS, we can grab onto these IDs and we can style these sections by their ID, but we also have something called classes. Now, a lot of people get confused on when do I use an ID and when do I use a class, and the reason for that is there's no functional difference. Like, they don't behave any differently. You can style them the same exact way, but it's good practice to always have your IDs be individual, meaning you're not going to have a main header ID anywhere else. Like, you're not going to go down here and have a main header ID. You're not going to have another section on the page that has an ID of about. So basically just one per ID. Now a class you can repeat. So let's say we wanted to style like a border and a light gray background around the about and the contact area. We might have a class called card. Actually, I'm going to add a CSS style up here, and don't worry if you don't know what any of this is. I'm going to do this later. I'm going to show you this later. But I'm just going to put a style that grabs onto the card class, and we're going to add a class of card to both of the divs of about and contact. So, oops, did that backwards. We want to do class equals card. And then let's go down to the contact div right here and also give that a class of card, and let's save. And now notice they both have the same styling. So you can see the difference here. IDs, they're individual to that section, but classes you can repeat. So we can have as many cards as we want. If I wanted the header to have that same style, excuse me, I could give that a class of card as well, and it would get that styling. Okay, so that's the biggest difference between IDs and classes. Now some people, I mean, everyone's different. Some people don't even use IDs. They'll just use classes. Like, instead of doing this, you might see something like this, like class, main, header, and card, both in you know, both classes. But I think that this is a better way to structure it. Okay, but you'll come to find your own way of doing things. But generally, the most important thing is not to repeat IDs on the same page, at least. All right, so next let's talk about divs and spans. We use quite a bit of divs here to separate out our content, and the main difference between a div and a span is a div is a block level element. It pushes the next thing down. So let's say I had a style for, let's do a class called enhance. And let's say we want the color to be yellow, and we want the background color to be black. And this is CSS. I'm gonna go over this all in the next section. And let's say we wanted to add it to a piece of text in this paragraph. So if we use a div, if we say div class equals enhance, and let's wrap this div, let's put it like right here, and let's save it, we get that styling, but it knocks it onto the next line. It basically goes in between, you know, this line and this line. This is a case where we want to use a span because a span is an inline element. So let's grab this. I'll highlight this div and do Control D to grab the next one and just change them both to a span. Okay, save it, and now notice that it's not block level. It just stays in its place and we can still add that styling. So that's the difference between a span and a div. For the most part, you're going to be using divs, but when you need it to be inline, you want to use a span. Now, HTML5, when it was released, it came out with something called semantic tags to better lay out our sections. So, for instance, there's a header tag, which we could use instead of having to use an ID, we could use the actual header tag. There's something called a nav tag we could use for navigation. There's section tags for stuff like this. And we're going to go over that soon. But in the next video, I want to just quickly cover entities, okay, which are little symbols we can use in HTML. For instance, this copyright down here, if we want to put a copyright symbol, we can do ampersand copy semicolon, and if I go ahead and save that, and now you'll see down here it actually gives us a little copyright symbol. So I want to talk a little bit about that in the next section before we move on to HTML5 semantic tags.